Hello, history fans! Today we're going to be talking about Module 4, the Road to Revolution. So be sure, again, to kind of remember those learning objective questions. We'll hit a few of those today, describing how military endeavors, maybe the 7 Years' War, social movements, maybe the Great Awakening, political questions and Enlightenment ideals combined to convince people that independence was needed. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the nation's founding documents. We're also going to talk about my fave person, one of my fave people in history. This guy. Who has a guess as to who this person is? You're right, Benjamin Franklin. Absolutely. Of course, I know you knew that. Benjamin Franklin, pictured here. This isn't normally how we see him. He's kind of unrecognizable. But Benjamin Franklin is an important historical figure who can tell us a lot about the mindset of the English colonists right before the American Revolution. The English colonists in America were facing an identity crisis. The more colonists tried to assert their status as English, the more England pushed them away. The more colonists tried to assert their status as English, the more England tried to push them away. They were very worried that the colonies were too near to quote-unquote savage heathens who would sap their civilized, gentlemanly status. And so the American colonists, as we see here, go far out of their way to prove that they are, in fact, English gentlemen. So Benjamin Franklin, what do we see here? Let's kind of analyze this image. What looks gentlemanly about him? Absolutely. We see he has a wig and some magisterial flowing black robes. He looks very genteel. He looks very wealthy. He also has this lace cuff. Oh my gosh, if you remember nothing else from this lecture, talk to me about Benjamin Franklin's lace cuff. These lace cuffs were a very important art history technique for the time, because it illustrates that the wearer is genteel, that the wearer is wealthy, that the wearer doesn't have to work hard. Now remember, what's Ben Franklin's job before he becomes a founding father? Printers at the time were manual laborers, right? How does a printing press work? It's a big, huge wooden contraption, and you roll the ink, you put the movable type on the thing, and you roll the ink on there with this big roller, and then you put this big sheet of paper on it, and then you have this little press thing that you walk around and you push it and you push it and you push it, and it gets really sweaty, and your hands are all covered with ink and disgusting stuff. And that is not how Ben Franklin is pictured here. His hands are soft. His hands are very pale. He has a lace cuff that would have gotten all sorts of stains and ratted if he had been working in a printing press. He's making himself seem like a gentleman. This is how he and other English colonists wanted to portray themselves, as genteel, intellectual, wealthy people. Another example of this paradox, this how American colonists are colonies very, very quickly, lasts about 30 years, and this religious revival, new style of preaching. Before, preachers had to be college educated, they're relatively wealthy, they're very dry, their sermons that they give are very logical, they're sprinkled with a whole bunch of biblical verses, and they're boring. And people get sick of it. And so the Great Awakening, a new style of preaching that is extemporaneous, very passionate, very fire and brimstone. These are laymen, they're not college educated, and they're itinerant. Instead of having a church somewhere, a parish for which they are supposed to shepherd those people, they just walk around the countryside and preach to whoever happens to be near. And listen, because of this new style of preaching, new faiths are created. Maybe this is some of you, right? These are still very popular denominations. Baptists, Methodists, Presbyterians, those denominations are all created because of the Great Awakening in the 1730s or 40s. And all of this leads to greater liberty, there's our favorite word, greater liberty in the marketplace of religion. Suddenly people have a choice. Suddenly people have a choice. They can choose to be Anglican, the national official church of England. They can choose to be Anglican, or they can choose to be something else if they want. So this is a central paradox. And think of the Great Awakening in connection with some of the other those out. And so all of those three things together, if the English colonists in America are trying to assert their Englishness, trying to prove that they are English gentlemen, they drink tea, they have lace cuffs, they play cards, they're well-educated, intellectual people. But at the same time, they're also learning to stand by themselves in very new ways. Learning how to religion, for example. They can't be both. They can't be both English and something else. Something's got to give. And it all starts to come to a head during the 7 Years' War. This tension increases in the 70s, what it is, right? Basically, it's England's war against the French in the North American continent, mostly begun in America. And since when it's begun when French and their Native American allies attack an English fort in what is now current day Ohio. But since both England and France have a worldwide empire, that war spreads to the rest of the world. Moral of the story, they win the war. The Treaty of Paris. England wins the war, and the Treaty of Paris is signed in 1763, officially ending the war. Now, winning this war makes colonists feel very English, and they're very happy. Hurrah, hurrah. But after the treaty is made, and people start thinking, they become very disenchanted, very disappointed with England and with the way the end of the war was handled. The American colonists first feel that the treaty is too soft. All of this, you can kind of see on this map, the very, very small key and legend over here. All this pink land is now taken from the French and added to the British Empire. So they got a lot of new land. But France did still keep some land. And the American colonists in particular are very angry about this green line. The English crown says the American colonists cannot pass that line. And they're very angry because remember, land equals opportunity, land equals wealth, land equals voting rights. They want to be able to move inland to the interior of the continent, and they can't. So they feel like the treaty is too soft. Secondly, there's also a lot of tension between the colonial militia and the Royal British soldiers. Colonial militia felt that they were incompetent and that they had treated the colonial militia like second-class citizens. The reason for this, pretty real. This is a fair assumption. This is a logical thing. At the time, no matter how high-ranking a colonial militia official was, a colonial general, for example, highest of the high, he could never give orders to anybody in the British Army, British Royal Standing Army. So a private in the British Royal Army would always outrank even a general in the colonial militia. And this doesn't seem very fair to people. Those British Royal soldiers take great advantage of this rule. They are forcibly quartered in colonial people's homes. And they knock on your door and they say, hey, I got 10 people here. You got to house them in your home. Find a place for them. Feed them whatever they want to eat. Give them to drink whatever it is they want to drink, all on your dime. The Royal Army isn't going to pay for anything. Thanks. And they leave. And all of a sudden, you're left with having to try to find space for these people, try to find food and drink for these people, and you don't get any sort of compensation for that. That's called quartering. So colonial people, American colonists, don't like that British royal soldiers were quartered. They don't like the way that they were treated. General Braddock, B-R-A-D-D-O-C-K, wrote that George Washington, who was one of his aides in the 7 Years' War, George Washington was lazy and undisciplined. That is a direct quote. That is what he called the father of our country. Oh my gosh, imagine calling George Washington undisciplined. So the British royal soldiers take a lot of advantage of colonists. And worst for the colonists, the worst thing that they do is English Parliament forces the colonies to pay for the war via taxes. Our third point here. Parliament taxes the colonies to pay for the war. Wars are expensive, right? Wars take a lot of stuff. You gotta buy the munition, you gotta buy the guns, you gotta buy the supplies, all of the horses' tack. You have to feed all of those people. You have to pay all of those people. Wars cost a lot of money, and so they start taxing the colonies to pay for it. This leads to a problem. Great Britain and the American colonies do not view taxation or representation in the same way. Great Britain, on the one hand, feels like colonies should pay for the taxes in exchange for continued British protection. They got a lot of new land out of the 7 Years' War. They started the war in the first place, so it does seem only fair that they pay for it. Secondly, Great Britain feels like Parliament represents the entire empire. They call this virtual representation. It doesn't matter to the British where a member of Parliament is from. A member of Parliament may be from Kent, for example. But he doesn't just represent the people from Kent. He's supposed to take into consideration what's in the best interests for Englishmen around the world, whether that's in Kent or in Virginia or in India or Malaysia or somewhere else. The American colonists do not think this is fair. The American colonists do not think this is logical at all. How is somebody from Kent who's never been to India or Malaysia or Virginia supposed to know what life is like there? So the American colonies don't think that virtual representation is adequate representation. And if they're not represented, they shouldn't be taxed. And we know this becomes the American colonists' rallying cry, right? No taxation without representation. This is where it comes from, that era right after the 7 Years' War. Now, Parliament, as we know, doesn't buy that for a minute. So they start taxing the American colonists, and again, in your textbook, you can check that out. The Tea Act, the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, all of those various taxes, on and on and on. One of the most important events right before the Revolution that I want to spend a minute on is the Boston Tea Party in 1773, surrounding the Tea Act. One of those taxes that Parliament enforces on the American colonists to try to pay for the 7 Years' War. A tax on tea. Now this is a real problem for the American colonists. Remember that idea of becoming English that we just talked about. The more American colonists try to be English and assert their Englishness, the more England seems like they push them away. Drinking tea is a very English activity. What's more British than tea? I don't even know. Like, that's all that there is. Drinking tea is a way to assert your Englishness, and so a lot of people do it and think that that's a way to prove their Englishness. It makes them feel very proud to be part of the English Empire by drinking tea. And so when Parliament taxes tea, makes it harder for the American colonists to drink tea, to do this very English thing, it seems like Britain is pushing them away. And this is the last straw for the American colonists. December of 1773, 120 members of the Sons of Liberty, a terrorist / patriotic, depending on which side of the American Revolution you're on, dress up as Mohawk Indians. They sneak aboard ships loaded down with tea in Boston Harbor, and they dump the tea overboard. They destroy what would, by today's standards, be $1 million worth of property. Destruction of property on a mass scale. Why do they dress up as Mohawks? Why do they dress up as Mohawk Indians? Why is that important? They're no longer asserting their Englishness. Remember all the way back to that second module, New Span, where we're talking about the discovery of America image, right? America and the American continent and the people who lived there tended to be represented in art or in literature or in society in general as Native American. At the beginning of today's lecture, we said this made the American colonists very nervous because they were so close to this quote-unquote savage heathens that they're not English anymore. When those men dress up as Mohawk Indians, they're saying, screw you, England, I don't want to be English anymore. I want to be something different. Now the American colonists are pushing themselves away from England. They don't want to be English anymore. They want to be something else. And so the Boston Tea Party, a turning point on the road to the American Revolution. And to end here, whoops, I'm pushing the wrong button, sorry. To end here, let's go back to your good friend and mine, Ben Franklin. Much more recognizable now, right? Let's think about that question again. Are we not English? Are we English gentlemen? He says, no, we are American. Ben Franklin, in 1773, same year of the Boston Tea Party, Ben Franklin in 1773 is an ambassador to England. Now, up to this point, Ben Franklin has considered himself English. He wants to be very conciliatory. He wants to patch up all of the differences between England and the American colonies. But while he's in England as an ambassador trying to advocate for peace, he finds the Hutchinson letters. The Hutchinson letters. And these are letters that tell the royally appointed governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony to crack down on the American colonists. They badmouth the American colonists. They say that they need to start paying not only the taxes that are in place now, but more taxes. And when Ben Franklin finds these letters, he is livid. He is livid. And this is the last straw for Ben Franklin. And so now we no longer see him in this picture. We no longer see him with his magisterial robes and his fancy English wig and his lace cuff. No, my friends. He's wearing homespun. Homespun. Cheaper, coarser cloth that is manufactured in America. He's wearing a beaver hat. An animal that is native to North America. A symbol of North America. So, by abandoning the lace cuff and advocating for beaver hats, Ben Franklin is saying we need to stand on our own, we need to be American, we need to be independent. They don't want to be English anymore. When the Sons of Liberty dress up as Mohawk Indians, they're saying the same thing. We need to abandon tea and Englishness. We need to stand on our own. We need to be something different. We need to be some American now. And so all of these things together start to convince people, slowly but surely, to advocate for independence. So, for our document discussion later on, we'll talk about some more ways that people advocated for independence. Thomas Paine, for example. But for now, that's enough. I'll see you later.